Good morning, everybody. I'd like to call this meeting to order. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Treaty 1 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. My name is Marla Billinghurst, and I'll be chairing the panel this morning. To my left is Mr. Maurice Terrien, and to my far left is Mr. Richard Whitbread. Our assessor this morning is Miss Lindsay Wareham, and our recording secretary is Miss Kelsey Harrison. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that applicants or the assessor make at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the Board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of Queen's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the Board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the matters to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony, followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony, followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish, and once all the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the Board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the order by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. And may I please ask that everyone silence their cell phones? Thank you. The first matter on the docket this morning will be 209 4th Street.
Could you please state your name?
Lindsay Wareham.
And do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, thank you.
Do you swear in or affirm?
swear.
Could you please state your name?
Rod Slaughter?
And do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, okay. Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We're looking at file number 19-3790, roll number 12093048100. If you turn to page 2, you'll see we're looking at a surface parking lot with 22 stalls, and I'm recommending to maintain the 2020 assessed value of $607,000. If you turn to page 3, you'll see the aerial photo of the subject property showing its location on the west side of 4th Street between Graham Avenue and St. Mary. On page 4, you'll see subject property photos. On page 6, you'll see land sales. The subject property has 6,044 square feet, and the per square foot rate is $100.43. This is a smaller property, so the most comparable properties are comparables number 6 through number 9. 220 Main Street is accessed via only a back alley off Graham. 286 Garrity Street is in the subject property location, as well as Carlton Street. 44 Hargrave is south of Broadway, so it's in an inferior location to the subject property. On page 7, you'll see the income valuation summary for the subject property. We have 22 stalls with a monthly net unit rent of $103.50 a stall. For the 2020 cycle, we're using a 4.5% cap rate. This is what's called our inner downtown parking model. Our inner downtown parking model is the highest rated parking model that we have. And with respect to the inner downtown parking model, the subject property is located in the neighborhood characteristic area of 161. And that is the area in the city of Winnipeg that charges the highest rates for parking due to its proximity to the MTS Center, so location in the Shed District essentially. And neighborhood characteristic area 161 is bounded by Main Street, Portage, Broadway, and Balmoral. So that sort of square, that main grade of our downtown. On the bottom of page 7, these are comparables that we've taken from 2017 income and expense mailers. So these are actual incomes taken from income and expense mailers. So the stabilized net operating income per stall per month column is taken directly from the NOI line of the income and expense mailers. So it's exactly the way it's described. The net operating income that's reported by the owner divided by the number of stalls divided by 12. The expense ratio on that chart also is taken directly from the income and expense mailers that's reported. The information with respect to monthly rates and casual rates, that's just for informational purposes. There isn't a correlation between the expense ratio, the monthly rate charge to come up with the stabilized NOI. That's just additional information. So you'll note that a number of these comparables are in the subject property. They actually all are, with the exceptions of 416 Main Street. That's at the corner of Portage and Main, next to 201 Portage Office Tower. And 91 Edmonton Street is on the south side of Broadway. So as I previously stated, on the south side of Broadway, typically you're seeing rates that are a little bit lower that are being charged due to its inferior location. Properties that are in very close proximity to the subject, we have 208 Fort Street, comparable number 7, 252 Fort Street, comparable number 5, just as an example, but again, these are all within very close proximity to the subject property. On page 9, you'll see cap rate information. This is general cap rate information that we put in all of our briefs. You'll note that there are no parking lots in this chart. These are just property types that are reviewed by other companies, and then we put our cap rates in here to show how our cap rates from our model are being applied. On page 11, you'll see the income and expense mailer for the subject property. And then on page 15, I've just shown some comparable gross rates that are charged. The subject property actually is managed by a parking management company, which is not typical of what's happening in the market, especially in this area. So I've included some properties from parking management companies as of the reference date as to what type of rates they're charging in close proximity. So 225 Fort Street actually is, if you turn to page 3 on my brief, 225 Fort Street is located just a couple properties over from the subject property if you look over at me. So it's the one that's just north, that larger lot.
Okay.
And they're charging $225 a stall as well as $205 a stall, and at the reference date there was a wait list for that parking. In addition, they have hourly and daily and evening rates available. If you look in our addenda, we have the addenda that we place in all of our briefs. You'll see that 2020, we take a fresh look, we look at the data that's available to us for every reassessment as mandated by the legislation to come up with our new model values. On page 20, you'll see general cap rate information. Again, you'll note that none of these are parking lots, but these are sales that have transacted close to the reference date, that have been reviewed and had 3 years of stabilized income reviewed on them to come up with cap rates. So if you're looking at the office ones, we have cap rates that range from 5.1 to 6.35%, retail cap rates that range from 3.1 to 7.4, multifamily cap rates that range from 4.03 to 5, and industrial cap rates that range from 4.97 to 8. Parking lots are essentially vacant land. Vacant land doesn't sell with a cap rate. And when you're looking at something that can be an interim use or a transitional use or a use that's an ancillary use, there's a lot of reasons why parking lots operate. But with respect to the subject property and its location, this is an area where parking is in high demand. There's a lot of things going on in the downtown. So when we look at parking and we look at the cap rates that are happening for improved properties, and we have a piece of vacant land that doesn't have a cap rate, parking lots have a lot less capital costs involved. There's less depreciation and assets that you need to maintain. So when you're looking at improved sales that have cap rates in and around the 5%, it doesn't make sense for a surface parking lot to be above that. So in 2018, we had a 5% cap rate for the inner downtown and outer downtown parking model, and in 2020, We left the outer downtown parking model at 5%, but we did move the inner downtown due to its location and what's going on in that area at 4.5%. That's my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Do you have any questions?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Ms. Worm, did you mention that this property is located in the shed?
I refer to this area as the shed, but I said it's located in NCA 161, but for explanation purposes, people refer to this area as the shed, even though the shed is a boundary of certain streets in this area that go down to about Donald, some of it goes north of Ellis, but it just helps to describe where it is.
Okay, so yeah, I understand what you're saying.
So there are
Not truly in the
sections,
shed, but
yes.
just in the downtown. Okay. You had mentioned some comparable properties that you're looking at for the determination of the market rent. Was the actual rent attained considered at all with the subject property?
Typically, we're looking at market. The actual rent attained, this subject property has had some issues in the past with respect to how they report their mailers. There's been non-compliance penalties sought in the past because they had been supplying mailers. It's actually operated with the adjacent buildings. There's 2 adjacent buildings. So previous mailers we couldn't glean any information from them because everything was lumped together. We couldn't separate expenses and net operating income. So this was actually the first cycle where they submitted a mailer where they were able to separate it out. But typically when we're looking at this, and when I looked at this mailer for this particular property, it's not really what's happening in the market, because when you turn to page 13 of the income and expense mailer, they're charging a wide range of rates for parking. It doesn't explain how many stalls each of these have. So it says MD Practice Solution, it says $9.24. I'm not sure how many stalls that's for to know what the gross rate is, but just looking at the $110, $115, or $150, I should say. Based on the analysis that we've done, I pull all of the gross rates from every parking website possible every cycle to look at what's being charged, and that's significantly under market. So I looked at this mailer, and I know they're not attaining what our model is producing, but at the end of the day, I have to look at market value and the market evidence I have with respect to the net operating incomes that are being reported from property owners in the area, as well as the gross rates. It's definitely performing well under, so I just took that as that's not market.
So you recognize that the actual income that they have submitted to the city is $16,705 as opposed to the assessed income of $27,000.
Yes.
Quite a discrepancy.
Yes.
And the average of these rents appears to be $150. Like if you take the number of stalls, it's about $150 per stall per month.
Okay.
You mentioned that this property performs with the properties at 205 and 207 Ford.
Yes.
And it's actually leased to the tenants of those buildings, correct?
Yes.
Do you think that if the owner was to try and increase the rents on this property to what you believe is market, that would have an effect on the rents they attain at 205 and 207 Ford?
Quite possibly, but again, we're looking at market value. So what a willing buyer and purchaser on the market would take. So if they were to purchase this property by itself, they could be charging higher rates because, like I said, when you looked at the comparables that I showed with respect to gross rates, there's wait lists at $225 and $205.
Yeah. At a different lot, correct?
At a very close proximity neighboring lot, like I pay for my parking on Princess and Alexander $130 a month. So $150 in that area is significantly below market.
Okay, but you agree the highest and best use of this property is to serve the tenants of 205 and 207 Ford, correct? It's one economic unit?
They're currently serving the 209 Ford, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Cap rates, you mentioned some cap rates for different types of properties, not parking lots. There are no parking lots included in your capitalization rate study, is that correct?
In my brief, no.
No, okay. So there's no evidence for the 4.5%?
Just the verbal evidence we've provided and the cap rate information that we've provided on other properties.
Okay, and you're suggesting a 50 basis point compression in the 2 years between the reference years as a kind of a subjective adjustment?
We went from 5% to 4.5, correct.
You mentioned some sales that I guess back up the income approach on page 6. And would you agree with the appraisal Institute when they suggest that an appraiser must also recognize that frequently a higher than market price might have to be paid to assemble a tract of land. So that assemblage, I guess, is what I'm asking, typically will come with a premium above market. Would you agree?
In some cases, yeah.
Okay. And would you agree that comparisons 6, 7, 8, and 9 are all assemblages? Or part of assemblages?
I actually don't think I agree with that. Let me look through my information. They're purchased, some are purchased and owned by adjacent property owners, but I don't think that they were purchased for any assemblage with respect to development.
But they are purchased by the adjacent property owner?
Some of them were, yes.
Okay. Would you agree with the IAAO then when they say that sales in which the buyer already owns adjoining property should be examined carefully?
We have examined these sales, yes.
Okay. That's all the questions, thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Whitbread?
No, I have none.
Mr. Terrian?
Yes, I do. Just looking at market here, so I'm looking at page 3, portion B. What's the front size on this property? Are you able to tell us? It's this property here?
The
What-
frontage of it?
Yeah,
I actually don't know that.
yeah, because I'm sort of looking at market if, you know, depending how wide this is, so you don't know.
No, I don't. My
Okay,
apologies.
number 2, my second question is on the sale. Do you know anything about the sale on page 5?
I believe that was a multi-roll sale for all the properties.
Or you believe, so you haven't looked into it?
No, I have.
You have?
Yes, I believe that's what it is, yeah.
Okay. And my last question is back to the mailer on page 11. I'm seeing the issue of maintenance and repair at $4,300.
Okay.
That seems pretty, do you have any information what this could be about? Because that seems fairly substantial.
I don't have any information on what is involved in the maintenance repair expense that has been
Okay, because,
reported.
you know, that would affect the NOI, obviously, and I see waste and snow removal, and, okay, I'm trying to get a better picture, thank you. Thank you, Madam
Okay.
Chair, I'm done.
Thank you. I have no questions. Mr. Slaughter, please proceed with your presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our direct evidence, 209 Fort. Ms. Warren has described the property in detail. I won't go through too many of those points as well, but a few important points to consider about the property. And it was kind of alluded to in one of the questions by the panel member. The lot is relatively small. It's only 6,044 square feet, and it's situated between two buildings. This will have an effect, in our mind, on other potential development for the site. And I think one of the fundamental principles that is going to be discussed is that parking lots are often purchased as an interim use, which is true, and some sales of parking lots are quite high, but oftentimes those sales are for developments which in our mind would not be physically possible or economically viable on some of the properties that we'll be discussing today, especially this one. So in the end, that combined with the fact that this serves the tenants of the adjacent commonly owned properties at 205 and 207, which are part of the sale that you asked about, results in a highest and best use of this property as being a parking lot. On page 2, we have the overhead aerial map of where the property is located, beside 205 and 207 Fort. And so we go ahead to first page 5. Now, being a parking lot, we agree that the income approach would be the primary method of value, but as a test, especially with parking lots, it's good to look at the sales in the market as well. And we've examined a lot of the sales, and we feel that some would be considered above market for reasons of motivations involved. And I'll get into that when I talk about the rebuttal. But the comparisons we show here on page 5 are, with the exception of one, we think these are all fairly good sales to consider in the downtown core. And you can see at the bottom that the average is $63.92, and the median is $62.34. The three that are highlighted in yellow, I think, are the best comparisons. But I'd like to talk a little bit about each of these, and actually we share them in our evidence, so might as well talk about them now. 155 Garrity is a very good comparison. It's a parking lot with 68 stalls. and it sold for $84.78. It's 18,000 square feet in size. The second is on Smith Street. Again, it's a very good comparison, $66, I believe, and it sold for $66.16 a square foot, a little bit back in 2014, mind you. And then the third is 242 Hargrave. Now, this is actually, in our mind, a motivated sale. This is the parking lot which was sold for the development of the True North Square. So there's a few factors that I think are important, again, to look at in the physical characteristics of the comparisons versus the subject properties. One is size. Now, despite the concept of economies of scale, that per square foot values increase as size decreases, with land there's a point where that reverses because there is no other development possibilities. So in other words, something that's over 10,000 square feet would likely have better development potential than something that's around 6,000 with minimal frontage. And so we have to be cognizant of that fact. And the second is, of course, True North Square is in a prime location for True North Square. I mean, there's a reason why they paid that much money. So I caution against that highest sale of the three. So again, the range of those comparisons is from $66 to $97 approximately. Now, on page 7, I had done something in the preparation of this brief, which I actually now am starting to second guess, and that is I time adjusted. And time adjustments, and I think Ms. Warren would agree, are very difficult, very subjective. But when I really thought about what's happening in the market between the time of these sales, approximately 3 years ago, before the reference date, to the reference date, the evidence that I'm going to describe is that we don't see any evidence that there should be the escalation that I've applied in a time adjustment, which is close to 15% from the time of the sales. So I caution against that time adjustment, and I think we should be looking at the sales as they exist at the time of their sales. The average then, especially when we take out the one at 242 Hargrave, we'd be looking somewhere between $66 to $85 a square foot. Even if we were at the high end of that range at $85 a square foot, that would justify what I'm about to describe as our income approach to value for the property. So on page 7, I start with the fact that when we look at the actual revenue that's attained at this lot, and this is in evidence, it's been provided by the owner to the city for 2017, the average rent per stall that they charge and that they attain is $150. So we're starting off with the presumption that the owner is undercharging them, or they're not doing the lot justice. They are not performing to market. And when we look at other lots, we might come to that conclusion. But I caution against other lots because of various factors. Location, even a block away, can make a big difference when with proximity to different office towers or different properties that it serves. So I come back to the point that I'm cautious about assuming that the owner is undercharging. Because what happens in these type of cases is that this parking lot is specifically to serve their assets at 205 and 207 Fort. Everything works as an economic model. The rents that they attain at those buildings might be influenced by the tenant's ability to attain parking nearby at a certain rate. In other words, if we are to assume that we should increase the rents for this property to what another property attains, are we recognizing the detrimental effect it would have on the owner's properties adjacent? My assumption is, and I should have asked this in questioning, but typically the city uses 40 to 45%, and that's corroborated by our evidence I'll describe as an expense ratio. And if I work that backwards, I think the city's gross rent per stall is about $190, which is substantiated by other lots in the area. But again, the subject is charging $150. On page 7, we go through the same sort of analysis as Ms. Warren had gone through, all different types of gross rents, what's being charged at different lots. And we're actually pretty on par, for the most part, with what typical lots might attain. But again, certain properties that we're going to describe today, for various reasons, are not typical. And there are realities about them that have to be recognized in their valuation. And on page 8, we go through our analysis of expenses, and this includes all expenses, taxes, management, insurance, utilities, snow clearing, R&M. And typically we find that the ratio hovers around 45%. I think that, as I mentioned, I think that is not in dispute. What we've done actually is veer from, and this is similar to what the city did, we veered from the actual rents in place. But I do that with a huge amount of caution. But we have used 180 a stall. And we then apply the 45% expense ratio, and we come in at an NOI that actually is so close to the city, it's really not worth talking about. But the reason that I really want to spend time talking about this is, I'm assuming something that isn't actual at the property. And if I was to buy this property, or this economic unit, the three properties together, I would probably feel a bit uneasy about the fact I'm assuming this lot can get more than the owner's charging now, without a detrimental effect on the adjacent properties. That unease should be translated into the capitalization rate. So now I talk about, on page 9, our analysis of capitalization rates. And I think where there are many similarities between the city's approach and what we're doing today, there are two main differences. One is site-specific issues at the properties that we'll be discussing. The second is, frankly, there is no evidence in place to suggest a 4.5% capitalization rate on downtown parking lots. Nor is there evidence to suggest a 50 basis point compression from what was applied 2 years previous. I should mention to the panel that most of the properties that we have in appeal today are outstanding at the Manitoba Municipal Board for 2018. So what may appear to be either a minor increase or even a decrease from previous cycle, I ask you to keep in mind that the owners of almost every one of these properties has appealed their assessments to the Manitoba Municipal Board. The issue is similar to the issue that we have today, and that is that we at Altus have felt that the capitalization rates for downtown parking lots for the last two cycles, 2020 and the previous cycle, have been too low. We felt that 5.5 should be the cap rate on downtown lots last cycle. In a few cases we won, in most cases we lost. Those have been appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board. But our opinion has been even bolstered this cycle because there's nothing to suggest that compression should have been at 50 basis points between April 2016 and April 2018. Let's talk about what's actually happening in the market between those two dates. And I think everyone here has heard us talk about this with other properties. But it's based on the fact that capitalization rates, one of the primary factors which influence them, is the cost of money, interest rates. And one of the reasons, primary reasons, that we've seen prices escalate on parking lots downtown, especially from the recession in 08 through to about midpoint of the decade, 2015 or so, is because cap rates were compressing. Cap rates were compressing because the cost of money was going down. So on page 10, at the bottom, you can see what's been happening with mortgage rates. And that basically is correlated with what was happening with capitalization rates. But what's happened between April 2016 and April 2018 is very important for our discussion around capitalization rates. And that's the first time since the recession in 2008, the cost of money has started, well, not only stabilized, it started going up. So if that's one of the primary factors in capitalization rate behavior, how do we come to a 50 basis point compression in the light of raising interest rates, rising interest rates? On page 11, you can see that although it's not a 1-to-1 ratio, as interest rates, and in this case bond yields, decrease, so do cap rates. But you can see that the bond yields, like interest rates, are starting to increase, and cap rates up to the reference date had stabilized. They're stable from 2016 to 2018. And based on what we're seeing from the Bank of Canada, I would suggest an investor in April 2018 would think, which way do I think these rates are going? They're not going down. This is substantiated, or actually corroborated, by the studies which all of us are kind of looking at. And we recognize that these studies by the brokers are for marketing purposes, but they're very bright people and they understand what's happening fundamentally in the market. What they've been telling us completely across the board is that, like I'm describing, cap rates have stabilized. There is no compression. for any properties between April, well, most properties between April 2016 and April 2018. And you can see that at the bottom of page 11. Now, they as well don't do a parking lot capitalization rate study, but I find it hard to believe, in light of all these factors and the evidence before us, that cap rates on downtown parking lots would compress 50 basis points. On page 12, admittedly, the reason that nobody really has a lot of cap rates for parking lots is it's hard to find. To find arm's length transactions with income in place that's not a motivated sale that you can derive a cap rate from. But there are a few that both the city and Altus have been talking about. And the three that we have are really the basis of what we were describing last cycle. And there's three comparisons that I show here. 155, actually, all of them are the sales as well that we described earlier. 155 Garrity is the parking lot I described. The cap rate that we determined on that was 5.06%. That was the lowest cap rate we found. The second sale is in Chinatown. I don't consider this a good comparison at all. The cap rate and the sale price. The cap rate's high, the sale price is low. I'm not going to include that as part of our analysis for this property. And then the last one was the aforementioned parking lot in Smith, where the cap rate we determined is 6.4%. This was what led us to believe that the capitalization rates last cycle should have been 5.5. We lost most of the time. We'll see about that at the municipal board. But for today, what I'm suggesting is, okay, look, if 5% was the cap rate last cycle, how on earth did we get to 4.5 now? I am suggesting that there should be no compression from what even the city suggested, never mind what Altus suggested, what the city suggested last cycle, and that the capitalization rates for downtown parking lots should be no less than 5%. There's nothing in evidence to suggest anything otherwise. And I come back to the point that what we've done here is apply market rents, which are above what the owner is actually attaining for the property, which increases the risk. So I think we're being, maybe we're a little low to suggest 5% on this because of the fact of using a higher income. But we're staying with that analysis. Our NOI, very close to the cities at 26,136, capitalized at 5%, brings us to a value of $523,000. That is $85 a square foot. That's at the high end of what I believe are comparable sales in the market. I see no reason or no evidence to suggest that the value should be any higher than that. In the appendix, Madam Chair, we simply have the same documentation as the city around the assessment and the valuation. The income and expense mailer, again, that shows that the revenues are $150 a stall on average. And we have one board order that is agreeing with, or the board agreed with our argument that for 2020, the cap rate should be 5%. These are few and far between, but there's one. That completes our presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Wareham. Do you have questions?
I have some questions and I have some rebuttal. How would you like me to go about it, Madam Chair?
Perhaps,
The rebuttal will be very, very quick.
okay, so do you want to do the rebuttal first then?
Sure.
And then.
And I apologize, I should have mentioned that I have rebuttal as well, but I can do that after.
Okay, sure. So maybe we'll do the
Now,
rebuttal and questions. and then-
Normally I wouldn't do this, so I have to preface this, and I hate to do this because I am not a believer in handing out board orders, but because Mr. Slaughter included it in his evidence, and the panel members have been reviewing it, and it was mentioned in the
Okay,
presentation.
well, I'm just gonna, sorry, not to interrupt.
Yeah, I just, because it was included, I just wanted to say to the board, this is the second docket this cycle that Altus has dealt with in this subject property location specific to NCA 161. And Mr. Slaughter included the one board order from that whole hearing that changed the cap rate. And I wanted to show the board that it was a little bit misleading to do that because there were particulars that were involved in 170 William Stevenson, and it's adjacent to the rail, and its proximity to the rail line, and the arguments that were made on this property specifically that was arguing by Altus that it required a higher cap rate due to that.
Oh.
And I just, took issue with the fact that this was in here and mentioned, and I really didn't want to hand it out and was hoping that no one was looking at it, and Mr. Slaughter didn't mention it, but because he
Okay,
did.
can I just stop you
Yeah.
for 1 second? I looked at the date of it and the address to see if it was a previous board order from this address, previous cycle. That's the only thing I looked at to see if it.
But
and-
other panel members were.
And the thing is, we don't consider that when we
Yeah.
make our decision, because you guys all know the reason. So that, it will not be considered when we're making our decision. I'm just letting.
I looked at it though.
And I did see that, and I did see reading, and so I'm a firm believer in not bringing in board orders, because as Mr. Slaughter mentioned, there are some that we get and some that you get, and we need to make our decisions on the information in front of us. But because it was mentioned and pointed out, if it had just been glazed over, I probably wouldn't have done it, which is why I was holding off on it. But I was part of that hearing. I was the one who was here. I was very aware. As soon as I saw the board order in the brief, I thought there was a whole docket that was adjacent to this, so.
And that's a fair comment. I wasn't at the hearing, so I didn't realize the site-specific issues, but I think Ms. Moram's point, and Madam Chair, your point is key, that the decision should be based on the evidence today. And the evidence is evolving, changing with each hearing. So we shouldn't really be looking at what happened previously, so I agree, thank you.
So if we're happy to all remove it, I'm happy not to hand out the rebuttal, and if we're all happy to not consider it and remove it from the evidence, I'm happy to not hand out the rebuttal. But it is in all of the briefs that are on the docket today.
I'm fine with removing it. I agree with Ms. Moram about the
Okay, so then I think,
Yeah, we go on the evidence that's before us today. Love it.
all right, so Ms. Wareham, continue with your question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Slaughter, looking at your evidence on page 12, you indicated that these are the parking lot cap rates that have been relied upon, looking at them last cycle as well as this cycle, correct?
Yeah, they're part of the evidence, I believe, last cycle.
So, just so I'm clear, these aren't actually the net operating incomes that are reported for these parking lots. These were derived based on the analysis that Altus does with respect to what's happening in the market. So these are actually imputed cap rates developed based on market evidence, correct?
Yeah.
Just because the way it was presented was that they were sales of actual cap rates, and I just wanted to make clear that these aren't actually the cap rates from these parking lot sales, correct?
That's correct. We don't have the actual income, so we've done, and I have the workups here if you have any questions about how we derive them.
And then you talked about the actual rents in place of the average of $150 a stall, and that is operated as one economic unit. So would you not agree that the owner is making a business decision because of their other properties to benefit their buildings by possibly offering below market rates to help garner their tenants, and that's a business decision and not really indicative of what's happening in the market?
Well, it's a business decision, but I think it's a prudent business decision because this lot serves those buildings. Like that is the audience for this lot. And so the owner has to make an economic balance of what the tenants are willing to pay, and that's what he's at. So I think it is very indicative of market for this property.
Okay. And then looking at your brief with respect to your income on page 8, my apologies, but you would agree that this is the first parking docket that you have done for Altus this cycle?
That's correct. I've seen all the evidence that's gone through from our office, and admittedly spent quite a bit of time going through it myself.
And so you would agree that you've sort of deviated from the gross rate that is typically used by Altus with respect to this area? Typically 185 has been used?
Yeah, I'm, with all due respect to any individuals that may have brought evidence before, I'm looking at this from my perspective.
Okay, perfect. I think those are my questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Mr. Wolfbrand, do you have any questions?
I'm fine, thank you.
Mr. Terrian?
I don't know if my question would be relevant here, but willing buyer and willing seller, would the importance of wanting to get a piece of property have some effect on the cap rate in those circumstances, I'm trying to weigh the evidence for the cap rate and,
I think what you're asking is,
so, you know, because with the comparables, what I'm trying to say is, there could be different circumstances that may affect the cap rate, and that's what I'm trying to see if you can't
well,
add a little bit to that.
I think you're exactly right. And the point that I'm trying to make with most of the properties in evidence today is that there are site-specific issues that we have to consider. So a blanket rate sometimes doesn't apply across the board. So there's two fundamental positions. One is there's nothing in evidence to support the 4.5. But even notwithstanding that, there are site-specific issues, I think, that have to be considered in the risk profile, positive or negative, for each property. So with this property, for example, its location is such that there is not much else that it serves but for the owner's properties at 205, 207, 40. So what it actually attains, in my mind, is evidence of market. If somebody came and bought that lot somehow, if the owner was to agree to sell that lot, let's say I bought it, and I thought, one day, this is going to be something great. Well, when I make that assumption, I have to look at the physical attributes of the site as well, and locational factors and stuff like that. So I would never think that this site, for example, could be the developments of, say, True North, or the Sky Condominiums, or Center Point, or any of the other things that are happening in the downtown which are commanding higher sale prices. It's not physically possible. And it brings me back to the point that for this property, the highest and best use in my mind is as a parking lot. So I hope that kind of addresses, Mr. Thurian, where you're, I think what you're asking is, well, what else could have been done maybe that would influence the cap rate on this property?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And I have no questions.
I do have rebuttal evidence
Okay.
that, yeah, maybe if I may, Madam Chair, because this will apply across the board, so I might as well go through it now. There's 11 copies there, so there's enough for panel members and the files.
Thank you.
So, Ms. Warren and I think, you know, there's a finite amount of evidence to be looked at, and we're sharing a lot of the same evidence, and I think there are a lot of commonalities in our approaches. We differ on the capitalization rate. One of the things that I think the city is suggesting is that because of some of the sale prices in their evidence, well, that must imply that cap rates have compressed, and I don't find the correlation there. But I especially am concerned about relying on the last four, particularly sales comparisons. To go through the city's comparisons, the first two are rather dated, and I still think they're valid, but you know, we're not looking at those as closely. The next three, I believe, we share in evidence, and then the last four, comparisons 6 to 9, are the ones that the rebuttal deals with. So if I may just quickly go through some of the points that we've found, that we're looking at from our side, and how these properties compare to the subject property. Okay? So the first one is 286 Garrity. This is sale comparison number 6 of the cities. It's a smaller lot as well. It's about the same size as the subject property, 22 stalls. It has a good curb cut access off Garrity Street, so it's a good property, like the subject. But it was purchased by the owner of the adjacent property to the south to be used as supplemental parking for their recently developed property at the time, the Pint, which was a 346-seat sports pub. So this is exactly what the IAAO and the appraisal standards that I alluded to in my questions of the assessor, that when you see sales like this, that are assemblages or purchased by the adjacent property owner, they're often untypically motivated. And I wouldn't go so far to suggest that automatically that means they're above market, but there's a flag raised. And I think we really have to, as the IAAO suggests, carefully look at these sales. And I would suggest that the motivations of this sale are such that we should not be using this particular sale transaction as evidence for something like the subject property. In the evidence here, I have the tax bills just showing that the owner of the adjacent property, 1642190 Alberta Limited, is who, by 2016, after the sale date, owned the property. So they were the ones that purchased it. So if we skip ahead, you'll come across another map further in after the supporting evidence for that first sale. This is the seventh sale of the city's evidence. The page numbering in here is chaotic, I apologize. They're page numbered by the comparisons, and then I have additional information. So the seventh sale, I hope the board has this here, is 0 Carlton. And you can see on the map where it's located. And this was actually, it's a roll number that doesn't exist anymore because it was purchased by the owner of the adjacent lot to the south and then merged together as one. This is going to be the site of the Sutton Hotel, which is the part of the True North development. So it's exactly the same situation. This is adjoining property owner has purchased this property, and I would be cautious about using this as evidence for other sales in the market, or properties in the market. And then again, we have, the only reason I show the assessment, Madam Chair, is to show that now it's merged. You can see that the subject property is part of this larger property now, adjacent. So that brings us to the third rebuttal is on sale number 8, which is 220 Main. So you'll see the map of where it's located on Main Street. It's the lot right between the, I believe it's called the Fortune Block and the old Winnipeg Hotel. The owner of the Fortune Block who purchased that building for renovations, it's Pollard Banknote's son, and well, the father-son team, doing a great job, by the way. They purchased that property. They bought the adjacent lot, and you can see that on the tax bills. They're now commonly owned by 5380589 Manitoba. And once again, this was separately owned by a different vendor than the Fortune Block was. We have all that in the evidence here. And there's a CBC article that talks about their plans, and they state in the CBC article that the space between the buildings is tentatively being eyed as summertime outdoor cafe and music venue that can complement times changed, or a patio if a restaurant opens in one of the buildings. The point being, once again, adjacent property owner purchased this site, something to consider with caution. And we go past the tax bills, which are shown to verify the purchase. And we come then to the last comparison. You'll see the map here for 44 Hargrave. 44 Hargrave is the 9th sale of the cities. Ms. Warren had mentioned that it's south of Broadway, so it's not a great comparison to begin with. One would expect that it probably wouldn't command as high. But the sale price is the highest of all the sales shown. And there's a reason, again, for that. It was purchased, this lot used to be improved with an old hotel that was vacant and it burnt down in 2015. And then a developer came and purchased this lot, and you'll see the two that are starred above it. They purchased those as well as at the same time. And in an interview, they admitted that they paid a premium to assemble this site for future development. It now sits basically awaiting the economic circumstances that would justify a development. Once again, this is an assemblage sale. This is exactly what the IAAO and the Appraisal Institute suggest that we have to be very cautious about. It appears high, and there's a reason why it's high. And I have the tax bills again to verify the purchaser. And again, it was two different owners that own the lots. That's why assemblages often are above market, because they're trying to piece together. It's like a monopoly. You're going to pay a lot to get Park Place when you already have Boardroom. That's the reason why, with respect, I would suggest extreme caution with any of the sales that the city is showing that go above, frankly, $95 a square foot. That can be justified if we have a property that is primed for development and we see the economic viability of development and the density that can be attained. That is not the case with this 6,000 square foot lot serving adjacent buildings situated between two buildings which aren't going anywhere. That's all the rebuttal, and I'll accept any questions.
Ms. Warren?
I do have questions, thank you. I'm in complete agreement that we do need to look at sales with caution. I agree with that, because you would agree when there are a limited number of sales, and this is the downtown Winnipeg, there's not vacant land that's readily available, and if people want to purchase here, and these are the only sales available to you, would you agree that you do still have to look at them? Because otherwise, what would you do if you're trying to develop an opinion of market value or have secondary evidence when you're discounting all sales, which almost all of them would be motivated in the downtown?
Yeah,
Would you not agree?
Well, no, I think we've gone through and shown a few sales that we think are very good arm's length sales that we are putting quite a bit of weight on, and the city has them as well. I agree with you though, Ms. Warren, we're frankly a secondary market. It gets difficult, especially every 2 years, to find enough transactions which you can say, that's it, we know exactly what the value is. And frankly, that's why we have the differences that we have, because it's very difficult. But I disagree with one comment, that there is a lack of supply, I guess, in downtown Winnipeg. I think one of the factors in Winnipeg that's discussed a lot is there's a high demand for parking lots, but there's a high supply, especially south of Portage. There's about, I think that last count, there's 40 surface parking lots in downtown Winnipeg. And so the point is, I don't disagree with certain lots that these kind of prices can be attained. We see it happen. But I suggest a lot of caution when we look at these and then look at the site-specific characteristics of any given property and assume that one can attain the prices the other did.
Now, speaking of that comment you just made, saying there's a high supply of parking lots, how often do those parking lots sell?
Not very often, that's why we're at a lack of evidence here.
Now, with respect to your commentary of you've relied on 3 really good sales that aren't motivated, if you actually look at your evidence with respect to almost every single sale on this page, not including the 3 highlighted ones, an argument that has been readily made by Altus is that 155 Garrity was motivated. It was purchased for a long-term investment. There was a government tender in place, which isn't typical. The Smith one says it appears to be an arm's length transaction. That one was actually purchased by 305 Broadway. 225 Carlton, you yourself have admitted that it was purchased by True North Square. So would you not agree that almost every one of the comments with respect to every sale that has been placed, there's a cautionary note that needs to be taken and made when looking at the sales? So I agree with you that there is caution that needs to be taken, but even looking at your own evidence, you have also taken caution with respect to almost every sale that has been placed in your evidence.
Definitely 242 Hargrave. But the other 2 I feel are about as, and again it's difficult like we both suggest, about as arm's length indicators of value that I can find. And again, if I see site-specific characteristics which warrant adjustments from these type of sale prices, I would completely agree. I don't see it here.
And I'm not in disagreement of what has transpired with the sales. I was aware of all of the things you mentioned with respect to my comparables. But you will agree that the subject property is at $95 a square foot. We have 12,000 square feet. In your presentation, you stated that properties over 10,000 square feet and properties under are not as readily available to, oh, my apologies, I'm not looking at the right phrase, are not as readily available to be developed. Sorry, going back, the property is 6,000 square feet. Looking at the sales that took place from comparables number 6 to 9, we're at $100 a square foot. You would agree that some of these are older sales, albeit motivated, but everyone in the market, in our opinion, is motivated. And you did indicate in your evidence, I know you did change that in the hearing, that there are time adjustments that are warranted and that properties do increase in value. So would you not agree that with these older sales, had they possibly been time adjusted, they would be higher than the per square foot rate?
Sorry, which, the number 6 to 9?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm strongly of the opinion, and I may be contrary to what previous Altus representatives have looked at in this evidence, but I have looked very carefully at it, and I'm a very strong opinion that these are above market transactions that I say should be treated with caution. Actually, I suggest they shouldn't be treated at all. Time adjustments. I did originally have a time adjustment on the 3 sales that I think are the best indicators, well, 2 anyway, and the third being the True North. And when I was preparing the brief, I realized everything that I am concluding from the evidence before me does not suggest the time adjustments I had applied in the past. In other words, what's happened with prices in downtown Winnipeg for parking lots, based on the evidence that I see, is that there's been a great escalation, probably by my estimation, 30 to 40% escalation between 2010 and 2015. And again, primarily, that's going to be driven by the cost of money coming down. Supply, demand are both healthy, and I think they're balancing out. The indicator of that is that the parking rates, and this is in the city's evidence as well, haven't really increased that much over the last number of years. There's a small increase. So I would suggest maybe a small time adjustment might be warranted, but not the type of time adjustment I was using based on the escalations of value because of the cap rate compression of the past. That's why when I finished the brief and I finished the rest of the evidence, I went back and looked after printing all the copies on it. It's not appropriate. I don't have the evidence to suggest that time adjustment. So, Ms. Worm, I would like to say that I agree that prices, values are escalating. But what I'm finding more and more as I go through the evidence on parking lots and the evidence I've gone through on office towers in downtown and a lot of other properties is those escalations are not only slowing, that they're starting to become stable. That's the evidence that I find compelling that I'm trying to communicate today.
Those are my questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Mr. Woodbred?
Fine, thanks.
Mr. Terrian?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
I have no questions either. Thank you. Okay, the next matter does not have an address attached to it. It's roll number 12093045000.
Now, just so everybody is aware, I will be going a little bit more quickly through my presentation. All of these properties are in very close proximity. I'm not sure if the applicant agrees, but a lot of our discussion and questions from the first property, I think we would like to be carried forward just to expedite things. So if there is anything that I go through a little too quickly and you would like some clarification on, I'm happy to, but I think a lot of the arguments from the first property should definitely be carried forward just in the interest of saving time.
There's going to be a few site-specific issues I may bring up, but generally I totally agree.
Absolutely, but a lot of the general arguments with respect to cap rates and land sales and things that are going on, I think that can be carried forward.
Perfect, thank you.
So we're looking at roll number 1209304500, file number 19-3282. If you look at page 2, this is a surface parking lot with 42 stalls. It's 12,084 square feet, and I'm recommending to maintain the 2020 assessed value of $1,159,000. If you look on page 3, you'll see an aerial photo of the subject property located on the east side of Fort Street between Graham Avenue and St. Mary. It is very close to the skywalk access and actually very close proximity to the property we just spoke of as stated previously in my evidence. On page 6, you'll see our land sale comparables. These have been discussed very frequently. We have the subject property at 12,084 square feet. We have a square foot rate of $95.91. This is a larger property than the comparables number 6 through 9. Comparables number 1 through 5, those are the larger property square footages. Again, they range from $65.90 upwards of $96.98. I will like to note that a lot of these are significantly older, and I do think that since 2012 there is a time adjustment that is needed. When we get closer to the reference date, I will agree with Mr. Slaughter, there is a smaller time adjustment that has been made recently, but specifically since 2012 there is a time adjustment there that needs to be paid attention to. On page 7, you'll see the subject property income workup. We have 42 stalls. We have a monthly net unit rent of $103.50 a stall. With a 4.5% cap rate, we have a value of $1,159,000. If you look at the bottom of my page 7, you'll see the subject property is actually comparable number 8 on the chart. And according to their mailer, they're charging $205 to $225 a stall, and they have a net operating income of $111.03. If you turn to page 11, you'll see the mailer that was submitted to the City of Winnipeg. You'll note on page 13, there's a lease to Imperial Parking. This is an M-Park lot. And then on page 15, you'll see the income that's attributed to the property. You'll note that if you look on page 15, we have a net rent And then we also have property taxes and miscellaneous, and then we have our net operating income. And it does say that the tenant pays all property taxes not shown on this statement. Those expense amounts are not in our possession or control. Typically, when we see a mailer like this from a property management company, the owner has, and based on our information and our research, the owner has signed a lease to the parking management company, and then they pay the owner a flat rate or an agreed upon rate, and InPark gets to keep the revenue and pay the expenses. So this isn't a full picture of what's going on, but this is a full picture of what the owner themselves is receiving. On page 17, you'll see the InPark details for the subject property. They're charging $225 a stall for reserved parking and $205 a stall for random parking. You'll note at the bottom of the page on page 17, it says 3/28/2018. All of these details I take like within days of the reference date, so when we're doing our reassessment information. So very close to the reference date, there was a wait list for both of the types of parking in the subject lot. On page 18, you'll note that this is a paved parking lot InPark has reported. They also have plugs here. They have hourly, daily, and evening parking with 42 stalls. And again, the remainder of our brief is the addenda. Our cap rate information is on page 22, and we feel that we're very confident in that 4.5% cap rate. That's my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Slaughter, do you have any questions?
Just a couple, and thank you, Ms. Wortman. It was very diligent on the analysis of the different properties. You brought up a great point about the actual income in place for the property. It's not quite a full picture because it's only showing the one side that the owner is in possession of control of. That's all they have, which is what they get from InPark, and then the taxes, because that's all they're responsible for. So my question, though, is that the expense ratio you show from this is 24%. Then that really isn't the true expense ratio, correct? Because we don't know the true revenue, we don't know the true expenses.
For the subject property, we don't know that full picture. We've actually gone out of our way with respect to land leases like this to send mailers to InPark, which they have not reported to because we've always wanted to get that full picture.
Yeah.
So the 24% expense ratio that the owner has reported clearly is much lower than what's happening in the market. And we're in full agreement with Altus. 45% is definitely what's typical, and that's what our modeling has come up with respect to looking at the 2017 mailers. So what the owner is getting at 24% is a lower expense ratio, albeit they are still getting $111 per stall as revenue, and we're using 103.
Yeah, and actually, I think the city's pretty much bang, this isn't a question, but a comment, the city's pretty much bang on in the net income. But I just wanted to make sure that it's clear that when we see that graph, which a lot of work has been put into, that there are numbers there that may be skewed as far as the expense ratios, because it's based on the information that you have, which may not be the full picture.
That's the situation with every parking lot, because every parking lot that we look at has a number of things involved in them. Similar to the property before, they were, in our opinion, charging below market rates. That wasn't, a lot of parking lot mailers that we get are losing money or not making an income because it's dependent on what the picture is. There are so many leases involved with parking management companies, and it's an agreement between the owner of the property and the parking management company of what both party wants to earn, how they want their property operated. Do they want to offer parking to the tenants of their building and have more reserved stalls than random? Do they want to not offer evening and weekend parking? There are so many things that happen with respect to parking that go into this information that's reported on mailers, that there's usually not a full picture, which is why we take the information as is and is given to us, because that's what has to go into our model. We don't disclude stuff because this is a land lease. We don't disclude income because they're not making any money because the owner isn't even charging for the parking. All of that information goes into our model. That way a full picture is viewed when we're coming up with these model rates. So if a parking lot, we get a mailer, and they're earning $1,000 in the downtown because they're offering free parking to their tenants, that goes into our model, that goes into the modeling, so that everything goes in there, and we're not, because we have such limited information, we're not getting our fingers in it and deciding what goes in and what's appropriate. Everything goes in because of the situations that are involved. Some are gravel lots, some aren't, some have plugs, some have this, some have that, some have evening parking, some don't even offer. Like, there's so many things that happen. So There isn't a full picture with respect to this subject property on the mailer, but that's the case with almost everything when you're looking at parking. So we just have to include everything to be as fair as possible, because that's our job, is to look at market and be fair and equitable across the board.
Yeah. And again, this is not a question, but I commend the city for taking all that information, coming to the conclusions that they have, which I think are a good starting point as a blanket, accurate picture. My concern is exactly what you're saying, because there are so many things with each property, site-specific issues, that a blanket rate might not be appropriate for every property. So, sorry, I guess there's maybe questions from the panel.
Yes, I was going to interrupt. I'm like, well, you're jumping ahead a bit. Okay. Okay, Mr. Woodbrad, do you have questions
No, I'm fine.
for the
Thank you.
assessor?
I'm fine.
Mr. Terrian?
Yes, I think it's been covered before, just to make sure. Generally, these parking lots are in the same area, but the square footage on this one is double the previous one. The cap rate remains the same, whether the size is smaller or bigger, it's always in the same area, or you're basically applying the same cap.
We apply the same cap rate, and it's for the main reason that Mr. Slaughter and myself have presented, that there is limited evidence. So if we start applying multiple cap rates to different properties based on size, and say, you know, a smaller one should have a higher cap rate because it can't be developed, we're looking at market. And then the next question would be, well, how did you decide on the size? How do you know what the boundary point is? Where is your evidence to support this? We're already having the question of, where's your evidence to support a 4.5% cap rate? Last cycle was, where's your evidence to support a 5% cap rate? The fact of the matter is, because there's such limited evidence, we don't have the luxury of applying multiple cap rates based on age or size and all of these things, because it's not there. So based on the evidence that I've looked at, and I've said this many times, caution has to be taken when looking at land sales, when looking at parking lot cap rates, because of things that happen. And based on my statements that I already made to Mr. Slaughter, I look at cap rates with caution, but you still have to look at parking lot cap rates. The ones that Mr. Slaughter has provided are imputed cap rates, so those aren't actually the income that's in place on the subject properties. So when you actually look at the actual income with respect to sale prices, you see a range of cap rates. If you're a property that has large square footage, similar to True North Square, and you look at the income from the parking lot, and remember, caution needs to be taken because that purchaser did not purchase the parking lot income. They purchased vacant land. But if you're looking at someone who's purchasing a piece of vacant land for development, albeit a parking lot, and you look at the parking lot income with the price that's paid for the land, you're looking at cap rates of 1-2%. If you look at the income from the parking lot at Sky City for any of the 3 sales that took place on that particular property, you're looking at 1%, 2%, 3%, really low cap rates. When you're looking at parking lot cap rates that have other income, like for example, 219 Main Street beside Earl's. The purchaser who, the owner of Earl's purchased that property. The income on that parking lot was very low. It's a parking lot via accessed only the back alley. It's a gravel parking lot. But if you look at the income that was in place at the time of the sale, paid for the sale price, which was sold from the city at a very low sale price, the income is still so low that the income for the actual parking lot was 4%. And that was in 2014. So when you're looking at cap rates, we have a range. We have
That's
really
fine.
low ones, we have really high ones. We have to look at market, and
Thank
we're
you.
at 4.5%, sort of in the middle of what we see happen.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, and I have no questions. So Mr. Slaughter, please proceed with your presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, again, there's a photograph on page 1. Ms. Wareham has described the property in detail. It's a better located property than the last one, in my opinion. It's closer to 240 Graham, which it basically serves, but in this case is not directly serving. They have it open to the market and managed by InPark. So InPark pays a fee, and then they cover the expenses, and then they lease out the stalls. It has curb cut access. It's a good size. So long story short, what I described with the last property was actual rents in place that in my mind are the indicative rents for market. They were $150 gross, which worked out to be with an expense ratio of about $82.50 per stall. But we didn't use that. We used a higher market rent of $99 a stall. It was $180 with the expense ratio. And I gave reasons around that, but I said be cautious if we're doing this when we apply the cap rate. For this property, we're using a higher, well, actually, we agree with the city, and they're at $103.50, I believe. And we came in almost exactly at that rate. We looked at market rents, gross, around $190. We applied the expense ratio, and we ended up in the exact same place. So the premium here, as opposed to the previous lot, or compared to the previous lot, is in the rent attained. So no contention with what the city's done. We come down to the capitalization rate. And I think this conversation is evolving very interestingly, because a lot of these points around the cap rates, I think, are very important, but they support exactly my position. There is no evidence for 4.5%. To Ms. Warham's point about the cap rates that we derived, we tried to do it in an appropriate appraisal method, which is looking at the market rents at the time of the sale. And just for the board's clarity, I have the rents that we used for, I'll talk about the two main ones, Smith and Garrity, the two parking lots that we really are looking at both for sales comparisons and cap rates. And just for the board's reference, we're using $180 per stall for 155 Garrity. I think that's probably pretty close to the actual gross, and then an expense ratio of 45%, and it was 170 on Smith. So just for the board's reference, because yes, they're imputed cap rates, but we believe that they're very good indicators of how a market is performing, and therefore we think these are very good cap rates. And again, at that time, they were 5.06 and 6.4% for comparable property parking lots in the downtown area. They were from 2015. We see no evidence, though, of compression from that time. So we're left with the same conclusion as basically we had last cycle. There is no evidence for 5 or 4.5. We see 5.5. But for today's hearings, I'm suggesting 5. Ms. Warham also brought up a great point about looking at some of the sales, and this is exactly why some of these aren't part of the cap rates of either of us, that when a property is purchased, let's take, it was one of the ones that was mentioned. I'm not sure of the examples, but hypothetically, one of the parking lots that might have been developed for Centre Park may have had a relatively low income at the time, but the owner didn't care. They're not buying the income. They're buying the potential to develop that site with a maximum density that they can attain. That's what's driving the sale price. And this exactly is my point when I talk about the cap rates that we're looking at and the sale prices, that we have to understand the motivations behind the sales. Because of course, if you look at a sale of a parking lot that wasn't purchased for the income, you might have it at a ridiculously low cap rate. Doesn't make sense. Of course nobody's buying a parking lot at 1 or 2 or 3%. The cost of money's higher than that. So then we look to the highest and best use as another use, and then we have to say, does the subject property meet that highest and best use? Once again, I'm suggesting no. This highest and best use of this property is a parking lot. The income approach is the best method to use. The income is not in dispute. There's no evidence for 4.5%. We think there is ample evidence for 5%. And so on page 13, we conclude that the value should be $1,053,000. Which, when we do look at the per square foot sale price, is approximately $88 a foot, and I think that sits well within the range that we described in our sales analysis. And that, I think, completes our presentation, Madam Chair. There's nothing in the appendix I need to draw the attention to. No, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Warham, do you have questions?
Just a couple quick ones, thank you, Madam Chair. Looking at the cap rates that you've derived on your page 12, and that you talked about the workups of how you come up with it. So you would agree that the cap rates that you've presented, the 3 that you've looked at, are exactly how the city derives their modeled cap rates with respect to properties. You've come up with a modeled net operating income, and you've applied it against time adjusted, I think in this case non-time adjusted sale prices, to come up with your imputed cap rates, which you would agree is exactly how the city's modeled cap rates are derived?
Very close. I think what the city does, though, correct me if I'm wrong, is they will time adjust the sales and then apply market rents at the time of the reference date. Is that correct?
That's because, yes, so
Yeah.
what you've done is you've used pre-reference for the actual sales, so you
Right.
don't have to time adjust them, where we do the opposite, we take market information for reconstructed NOIs,
Yeah.
applied against the time adjusted sale prices for the cap rate. So we've essentially come up with our imputed cap rates the same way. Would you not agree that you've shown 3 here, but there are more parking lot sales that have transpired based on your page 5?
Yeah, and that's exactly the point that I was making, that, you know, you can find it, well, for example, the Main Street property you mentioned. You described it basically exactly what it was. I mean, the parking lot was pretty terrible as a parking lot, it had poor access, there's no curb cut to it. Earls bought the lot from the city because they hoped to build a new Earls on it. So to suggest it was below market for the sale price, I'm not sure I agree with. The cap rate didn't mean anything, of course, because they weren't buying the income. What ended up happening with that lot is that planning decided and council agreed that they shouldn't build a new restaurant on it. 5 years later, it remains a parking lot, which will now be beside a vacant restaurant. But to come back to the point, the cap rate means nothing in that case. They weren't buying the income. The sale price, though, I think is interesting. I think it was $59 a square foot. It's one of the sales that we have in our evidence, actually. So that is why we can't use every sale for a cap rate extraction. I think we both agree with that.
And then my last question, would you agree that if you take the owner's net operating income and apply a 5% cap rate, you're sitting at $1,119,000 and our assessed value is $1,159,000?
Yeah, but that's, I think we both established this as not an indicative NOI. We don't know exactly what the NOI is. Probably higher on the income side, because I don't think Impark would pay a rent and not have something to show at the other side, but there's a lot of expenses missing.
But you would agree that's what the owner is getting as an income for their property?
Yes, but if we were to do that analysis, I would look at cap rates derived by that method. So,
Those are my questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Mr. Woodford, do you have any questions?
Nothing, thanks.
Mr. Terry?
No questions, thank you.
I have no questions either. Let's move on to 115 Donald Street.
So we're looking at file number 19-3508, roll number 1209336000. The address of this property is 115 Donald Street, and it's located on the east side of Donald between York Avenue and Broadway. In 2018, I made a recommendation to reduce the value to $273,000, which was accepted and not appealed to the municipal court. If you turn to page 3, you'll see an aerial photo of the subject property. The subject property is the narrow one on the back alley. It looks like a very small parking lot and very unassuming, but it's actually operated in conjunction with the larger parking lot that is above it.
Oh, okay.
And that parking lot was already heard and appealed. This cycle, I believe it was actually on the docket that was presented as evidence for the board orders. On page 6, again, these are our land sales. The subject property is 3,024 square feet, and we have $100.53 a square foot on this property. If you look to page 7, we have 11 stalls with $103.50 a stall for an NOI of $13,662. We have a 4.5% cap rate for an estimated value of $304,000. Again, all of my comparables are in close proximity to the subject property. Comparable number 11 and comparable number 12 are actually, if you turn to my aerial photo and look over here, comparable in 11 or 12 are just on that north side of York in close proximity to the subject. Just right here.
Okay.
Again, we have a 4.5% cap rate. On page 11 is the income and expense mailer, which we do not reference at all. This particular property owner owns a number of parking lots in the downtown. They sign land leases with Impark in almost exclusively all of them. The stall counts are, I think, 9 times out of 10 never correct, so we never rely on the mailers with respect to this one. We do review them, but I don't rely on them for appeal and defense purposes. On page 15, you'll see the subject property details. This is Donald and York, lot number 383, and they have 3 rates available at this particular property. Random 24/7 at $195, reserved 6 to 6 at $215, and reserved 24/7 at $225. I inspected this property on December 30th, 2013, for the 2014 appeal, and this small portion of the property is all reserved parking. This is not casual parking for this property. There are reserved signs on all of those, so that is where the reserved parking is, because it services tenants of the building that's adjacent to it. And again, those reserved rates are $215 and $225 a stall. That's my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Slaughter, do you have questions for Ms. Ware?
Thank you. Sure. Sorry, Mr. Webb, did you mention that the subject property, the 11 stalls on the subject property are the ones that are reserved 24/7?
Yes,
Okay.
The building, when I inspected at the time, it was operated by Vinci, and it has switched back and forth from, Vinci was previously the name of Indigo, and it's switched back and forth from Indigo and Impark since that time, and that's actually, the building beside it is where Colliers is located, and Colliers parks there. The
Okay.
signs all said Colliers, and they were reserved parking.
So then you'd agree that the income that they get is, that's it? I mean, the monthly parking is all they get because they're reserved stalls, so there's no casual parking here.
Yep.
And according to their mailer, they have $20,000 in gross, which is, I think, $150 a stall.
Yes, and again, this is a land lease that the owner has signed. They do this in all of their properties. I've reviewed this owner's mailers on many occasions. All they have to cover is their hydro, insurance, and property taxes in almost all instances. And they're happy to not have any risk and not do anything involved to get a net operating income of $13,000, because they're making a profit to essentially pay a tax bill and pay an insurance bill. That's all they really have to do. So it is what is reported on this mailer, in my opinion, significantly below market. They're charging, as I said, $215 and $225 a stall here. And if you apply a 45% expense ratio to that, it's $124 a stall.
Sorry, I'm not quite sure if I follow. The larger lot to the north is where the 225 is, or to whatever that number was. That's where they attain that, don't they? But didn't you say this is reserved 24/7? Like this is these are the rents that are attained by the tenant colonies?
No. So what I was saying was, if you look at the subject details from Empire,
Yeah.
to get a reserved stall, they charge $225. So those reserved stalls are getting $225. That's what Impark is charging for those people to park there.
That lot is the entire large lot, not just these 11 stalls, is that correct?
It's all of it.
Yeah.
It's the larger lot and
Right.
these 11 stalls. So Impark, for that big lot and these 11 stalls, because you'll note if you look on page 16, there's 117 stalls here. There's 11 in this one, and then there's 91 in the larger one, and then in the portion that has the restaurant on it, there's another, the remainder of the stalls are there to equal the 117.
So are these reserved by Colliers or no, these 11 stalls?
The signs from Vinci at the time when I inspected it said Vinci Colliers. So if you inspect any property in the downtown, if it's operated by Impark, they put signs on the stalls that say reserved. And a lot of times, they put signs on the stalls that are reserved and they say the tenant that it's reserved for. So they actually label the stalls. If they've been paid as a reserved stall, they will label them, indicating who is parking there. Sometimes they just say reserved 24 hours. Sometimes they say reserved 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Sometimes they say reserved 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. And then sometimes they have the tenant name. So if you go through almost any parking lot, and whenever I count parking lots, I actually take pictures of all of those signs so I know who's parking there, so I can reconcile what building they're located with respect to my research. So I think my point was, when you're looking at what's actually being charged on these lots, I was trying to point out that with respect to these specific stalls, because there's always questions with respect to well, you don't know how many are reserved, you don't know which one is this, or these random, or these. I was just trying to say that if you look at the actual details, they're not charging $195 a stall for these stalls. They're either charging $215 or $225, and there is a wait list at the reference date for those. That was
Are you sure
essentially-
it's not, they're charging $150 because that's what they're showing on the mailer? For reserved stalls? 20,000 divided by 12 divided by 11 is 150.
No, that's the income that the owner is getting from Impark.
But it doesn't say that this is leased to Impact, does it?
Based on my research and what I have reviewed in all situations, and I mean, the owner hasn't reported what is happening here, but based on all of my research and previous appeals, I have handled this property since 2014. I have reviewed all the mailers for parking since 2016, and it has been confirmed in previous appeals that this is a land lease with Impark. So that $20,000 is not what is being charged to the tenants. To my knowledge, this is the money that the owner is getting from Impark.
Yeah, I guess my concern is that typically with land leases, as we've seen with the first property on the docket, Impark pays a fee, owner pays taxes. But what the owner's telling us here is, doesn't mention anything about Impark for these 11 stalls. It has insurance, hydro, and taxes for other expenses. And you mentioned it's 24/7 reserved by Colliers.
I said
I
during
don't-
my inspection at the time.
Yeah, but I mean, everything, and I'm only asking this for clarity because actually this is news to me as well. But what you're telling me leads me to believe that this is what they get. If it's reserved stalls, they wouldn't need Impark. Impark's not gonna make a profit on top of that.
No, this owner is leasing out all 3 of these properties to Impark, and Impark is choosing the rates that they charge.
Right.
And these are, from what I gathered at my inspection in 2013, these are reserved. And to further state that it hasn't been reported as Impark, again, based on my research, previous dealing, I have dealt with this property and the adjacent one in every single cycle since 2016. I handled the larger
Okay,
portion.
sorry, I think we've heard this numerous times, the same evidence from
I-
you.
I think-
And I think, so perhaps the board, if there's nothing new
Yeah,
to
no,
add and
that's
no
fine.
further questions, perhaps we can move on, just because,
I
in the
know, I
interest of
think-
time, and then if you have other evidence, you can bring that forward and we can move on.
I think my concern of those statements that I was trying to get to was if they haven't reported what that lease is, and we're gonna dispute about who's there because they haven't said Impark, then I would have to seek penalties, because then the owner hasn't filled out the mailer as to what we have suggested.
Well, we don't know that, so I think
Yeah,
you've presented your evidence, and let's see if Mr. Slaughter presents any differing evidence. So
Yeah.
why don't we move forward from here, because I think you've presented your evidence
Okay.
clearly. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Do you have any further questions for Mr. Wickham?
Would you agree that there's no other highest and best use for development of this long, thin, small?
This is operated as a parking lot, and we have assessed it as such.
Thank you. That's all the questions.
Oh, okay, thank you. Mr. Whitbread? Mr. Terrian?
I just wanted something confirmed. The last hearing, you recommended 273.
Yes,
Was that, you mentioned that, was that accepted at the hearing by the appellant?
that was accepted by the appellant and the board, and it was not
Okay.
appealed to the municipal board.
Thank you.
And I made that recommendation based on our modeled income parameters.
Okay, thank you. That's all I had.
Okay, so, Mr. Slaughter, please.
Thank you. So right off the top, to address that question, I didn't handle this property before. I have an opinion of value, which I'm standing by today, regardless of the decisions of Altus at the time that were made on behalf of the owner. I'll cut this and make it very simple. We don't have a dispute with the net operating income that the city's using. We've gone through the same analysis that we've done on the other properties. We looked at comparable gross rents in the market. In this case, we felt that 180 is appropriate. We take 45% off for expenses, and we end up pretty much bang on with what the city has. So our contention, again, is that 4.5 is not supported, 5% is, we feel 5% should be applied, but this is an interesting discussion, because I think, with all due respect, I think I'm confused now about this property, because I'm being told that it's 24/7 reserved by Colliers, which I think is correct. It makes sense. The only people who would lease these stalls, if you look at the configuration, they're off of an alley. Like the access is, it's just wide enough for the cars, and that's it. And Colliers is in the building right next door, so that makes sense. But then I'm baffled, because why would, and I understand Impart leases the lot to the north, why would the owner lease these stalls to Impart to make a profit when they have them reserved 24/7? Now, if my assumption is correct that they are reserved 24/7, then in fact the total income is less than what we're applying. And again, I come back to the point that there's an economic decision that's made between the tenant of the building and what they can attain for, well, no, actually I dropped that, because this isn't owned by the same party in this case. So it's simply that they're getting $150 a stall, but the owner of this lot doesn't own 305 Broadway, I don't think. So there is no economic decision there. Okay. So I'm still confused on whether this is reserved and this is the income, or if this is part of the lease. In any event, we don't dispute the city's NOI. So we only come down to the 5% on the cap rate. Again, I put no weight on what the agreement was last cycle. I didn't handle the property at that time. So when we capitalize the city's income at 5%, we come to $261,000. And if I take that by the 3,000 feet, that equates to $86. Again, we're at the high end of the range that we're suggesting for sales in the market. The thing about this property is, though, as we both agree, it will be likely never be anything but a parking lot serving probably the tenants of 305 Broadway. You can't possibly do anything with a 3,000 square foot lot of this width. So that would eliminate, in my mind, any discussion about higher sale prices attained for properties that were purchased for other purposes or other development. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions for the...
Thank you. My apologies, Mr. Slaughter. I made my presentation based on the information that was in your brief. So sorry to confuse the subject. But on page 7, and this is where my presentation stemmed from, on your page 7, you indicate, based on the above, it appears the subject site could command $180 a month. Similar, slightly lower than, due to the inferior location on the alley, the site at 119 Donald. If you look at 119 Donald in your chart, it charges up $195 a stall, which is exactly what the Perk Details state for the property, because I know that how this chart is put together, you used unreserved monthly rates, which is absolutely what 119 Donald is. It's $195. So the reason I presented it in such a way is because it was clear to me that there wasn't an awareness that this was operated with 119 Donald, and that they do charge that. So aside from the reserved and all the confusing things that have gone on, for this property, you would agree they charge $195, $215, and $225, based on the evidence that's been presented here today. Would you agree with that?
No, I'm completely lost now, actually, because I know that Impart leases the lot to the north of this property, but what you're saying makes sense to me, that this is reserved by Colliers. I think that was the case last cycle as well, so I think I was mistaken as well.
So let's go back then to clear up any confusion.
Okay.
You would agree that on my page 16, Impart indicates that there's 117 stalls at Donald and York, lot 383. Would you agree with that?
I'm not disputing it, yeah.
Okay. And would you agree that I'm aware of how many stalls are in the larger lot to the north of it?
I don't have that.
so-
Okay, never mind.
We're not dealing with the larger lot or anything. We're only dealing with
I think I'm trying to.
these 11 stalls.
Yes,
You
and
guys are agreeing on the NOI.
Well,
so-
I'm trying to question his evidence, because the reason we're in agreement on the NOI is because he's made an adjustment to the rate that's applied to $180 based on the inferior location with respect to 119 Donald. So my point is, and which is where my questioning was going, if this is 119 Donald and we exclude the 215 and the 225 and we look at the 195 that's there, if you take 195 instead of the 180, since clearly that's what they're charging here, at the minimum, based on this being this lot, 11 stalls at 195 times 12 at your 5% is now $283,000.
I see nothing in evidence that they're charging $195 at this site, though.
Those are my questions. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Woodburn.
Nothing.
Mr. Terrian?
Thank you. No,
Nothing. Oh, so you said thank you. I
Yeah,
wasn't
that's
sure what you
all
were thinking. I have no questions either. Okay, so I think we're going to take a short recess now. Right. Thank you. I'm going to call this meeting back to order. The next matter on the docket is 177 Kennedy Street. Ms. Wareham, please proceed when you are ready.
Thank you. We're looking at file number 19-4388, roll number 12-093-646-100. The address as stated is 177 Kennedy Street. If you turn to page 2, you'll see I'm recommending to maintain the 2020 assessed value of $911,000. If you turn to page 3, you'll see an aerial photo of the subject property showing its location on the east side of Kennedy Street between York Avenue and St. Mary. We have 33 stalls on file for this property. On page 4, you'll see subject property photos. On page 6, you'll see land sales that have been discussed in great length. On page 7, you'll see our income valuation summary. We have 33 stalls at a monthly net unit rent of $103.50 a stall, with a 4.5% cap rate for a value of $911,000. We have a number of properties just located on Kennedy Street. I will state that again, all of these comparables are in very close proximity to the subject. Comparable number 6 is on Kennedy Street, and they're getting $113.15. Comparable number 10 is also on Kennedy Street, and they're getting $100.09. The income mailer can be found on page 11. And that is my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Slaughter. Do you have any questions?
No questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Whitbread?
None.
Mr. Terrian?
Well, I'm fine, thank you.
I have no questions either, so please proceed with your presentation.
Okay, I'll make this very quick. Ms. Warren and I were just discussing in the hall that it's interesting that we both are coming from different sides to look at the NOI. I'm doing an analysis based on my evidence and with the city's model, and we're coming up to the same numbers. And this is once again the same case. By our own analysis, we come in actually about $1,000 higher in this case than the city on the NOI. So the only discrepancy is on the cap rate. And again, I don't see this being comparable to the lots that may have sold for above $90 a square foot for assemblages or development as other property. This is a 7,000 square foot lot on Kennedy between two buildings. The highest and best use is a parking lot. So on one hand, I don't see any evidence supporting anything less than 5% cap rate. On the other hand, I see no evidence supporting anything above $90 a square foot. Sale price, based on the same evidence I've described, so therefore we are using a slightly higher NOI than the city at $41,382. Based on our analysis, capped at 5% comes to $827, rounded to $828 a foot, and let me just calculate quickly what that is per square foot. That would be $80.80 a square foot. Again, very supportable by the evidence that we think we've provided. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions?
I have no questions. They've been asked and answered. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Mr. Whitbread?
No questions.
Mr. Terrian?
Yes, on page 1. You've got 36 stalls, and you've got 994,000 as the request by the city. Could you try to clarify that for us, please? Page 1?
Yeah, I may have a mistake there, sorry.
Is it 36 or is it 33 or
Page-
994? So I don't know.
No, I think I made a mistake, Mr. Therian. I see that my area is off too, because my area is only 7,000. I apologize. Page 1 has a couple errors here. The assessment should be 911, not 994. My requested value is correct. Stall count is correct. No, it's almost correct. And land area is off.
And the stalls as well?
Yeah, stalls, I have 36, it's only 33. Yeah. Apologies. I used 33 in my analysis, so everything else is correct. It's just my front page as well.
I just want to look at that picture again where that lot is situated. Maybe I have to go back to the city, maybe?
Here, there you go.
Okay, where is it?
Kennedy and York.
Yeah, and it's here?
Yeah.
Okay.
So on the bigger picture, is that what you're looking for?
Yeah,
Mine is on page 3.
three?
There you go. There you go.
I'm sure I got it. Okay. Got it here? It's here?
It's in purple there, so I
But
think that's
here.
the
Here
convention
is
center.
here, yeah. Okay, that's all, thank you.
And I have no questions.
Okay, I'd just like to, based on Mr. Therian's point, I apologize. I did my calculation of the land area I'm requesting on the wrong area. It's actually $115 a square foot.
Oh,
High. Thank you.
thank you very much. Ms. Wareham, did you have any follow-up?
I do not, thank you, Madam Chair.
Good, thank you. Okay, the next file, 165 4th Street.
Thank you. We're looking at file number 19-3933, roll number 12-093-054-500. The address is 165 4th Street. There was a 2018 appeal, and the value was $894,000, appealed at the Board of Revision and not appealed at the Municipal Board. We have, or on page 2, we're recommending to maintain the 2020 assessed value of $994,000. This is a land area of 10,247 square feet. If you look at the aerial photo on page 3, you'll see the subject property is located on the east side of 4th Street between St. Mary Avenue and York Street. It's actually behind the Wawanesa building on Main Street. If you look on page 6, you'll see land sales. We've discussed them at length. We have 10,247 square feet at $97 a square foot. We have 36 stalls on file with a monthly net unit rent of $103.50 a stall with a cap rate of 5% for a value of $994,000. Again, I've gone through all of my comparables on page 7. They are all within close proximity of the subject property, and if you look at them, they're all significantly, if not most of them, significantly higher than the $103.50 that we have applied. I've discussed our cap rates at length. On page 14, you'll see the details of Impark, the subject property details. They don't charge any monthly parking here. They only charge evening and weekend parking through Impark because I believe this is tenant parking operated by the owner for their company. That's my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Mr. Slaughter, any questions?
Just quickly, Ms. Wareham, the actual income that the owner provided you indicates something far less than what's being assessed, is that correct?
That is correct. Again, it's one of the mailers that we've looked at, we've reviewed. They do have a related connection to the office building. Impark doesn't have any monthly parking here, so we do see that there is a business decision that's made for the owner of the property, which is not sort of typical of what's happening in the market, in our opinion.
Okay, so to confirm, this parking lot is owned by the owner of the adjacent building at 200 Main? And it's not leased by Impark, it's used by the tenants of that building?
To our knowledge, yes. The only Impark information that we have is Impark manages the evening and weekend parking on it.
Okay.
But there's no available daytime.
Great, that's all the questions, thank you.
Mr. Woodbridge?
Nope, I'm good.
Mr. Terrian?
Okay, thank you.
I have no questions, so please proceed, Mr. Slaughter.
Thank you. Very quickly, Ms. Warren went through the description. It's a surface parking lot with good curb cut access on 4th Street, just north of York. It's owned by Wawanesa, who owns 200 Main, that you'll see just to the east of the subject property, across the alley. And it's used for Wawanesa employees. We have no contention with the city's income. We're almost bang on, again, coming at it a different way. We used $190 per stall with the expense ratio of $45. We don't think that's below market. In fact, the owners, the reason why their income is so low here is because they charge their tenants, or sorry, their employees, half of what their market rent is. And their market rent is $185 as of April 18th. We're using $190 and we come out at the same NOI. So I think we're in the same ballpark, and I think then all three parties are kind of supporting the NOI as it is. The owner, myself, and Ms. Warren. So the only contention is capitalization rate. And for all the reasons I mentioned, I see no evidence to support 4.5, but I do for 5% or higher. I ask the board to consider the income capitalized at 5% indicates a value of, on page 13, a value of $878,000. And that is all, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wareham. Any questions?
I have no questions, thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Whitbrad?
None.
Mr. Terrian?
Well, thank you. I said no.
So funny. Okay. Okay, nor do I. I think I just need 1 minute to make a note, please, and then we'll move on. Okay. Thank you. The next matter is the address located on Kennedy Street. I don't believe there is an actual physical number associated with it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We're looking at file number 19-4159. The roll number is 12-093-672-000. This is, the address is Kennedy Street, and it's owned by the Winnipeg Clinic Holding Company Limited. We have a 2018 value of $596,000 that was withdrawn at the 2018 Board of Revision appeal level. If you turn to page 2, you'll see that I'm recommending to maintain the 2020 assessed value of $662,000. We have a land area of 6,037 square feet and outdoor parking stalls of 24. If you turn to page 3, you'll see an aerial photo of the subject property showing its location on the west side of Kennedy Street, just north of St. Mary Avenue, between Graham and St. Mary. The Winnipeg Clinic, if you look over at my brief, is just here on the corner of Vaughan and St. Mary, and they actually own the parking lot next to it, as well as the smaller one, which is the subject property.
The heavy purple.
Yes. On page 4, you'll see subject property photos. On page 6, you'll see land sales, which we've discussed at length. On page 7, you'll see the income valuation summary. We have 24 stalls with a monthly net unit rent of $103.50 a stall, with an annual net rent of $29,808,000. We have a cap rate of 5% for a value of $662,000. If you look on my comparables at the bottom of page 7, you'll see the subject property is actually comparable number 10. On page 11, you'll see the mailer that was submitted by the subject property owner. On page 15, you'll see the in-park details for the subject property. It's in park lot 326. We have a wait list for monthly parking at $180 a stall. This is a gravel lot with plugs. And that's my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Slaughter.
Thank you. Ms. Warren, this is not leased then by any other party. This is the owner collects the revenue and reports the actual revenue?
They do report actual revenue that they have. I'm not sure of the agreements that they have in place with Impark with respect to how it's managed. There's no hydro expense on here. The Impark details indicate that there are plugs on the property. So I'm not sure, I don't have the lease, the management agreement details, so I'm not sure what's going on, but based on the income that they have, we have presented that as a comparable on page 7. It's comparable number 10.
Yeah, with $100 the net, I think the gross was 43%. It all seems to fit with the analysis that we've seen thus far, I think. The monthly is $180 according to this. But the amount that they're actually collecting on their income appears to be a little less than that if we do the math, I think, right?
I haven't done the math of their gross income.
Thank you. So we talked earlier about some comparisons in the market, and I think it was a good discussion talking about what else is happening.
Is this
in the
still
market.
questions or is
Yes.
this? Oh, okay, I wasn't sure if you were.
Yeah, thank you. 219 Main was a property that was brought up, and you mentioned, and I agreed, that it wasn't a great parking lot because it didn't have access off Main Street. Is that correct?
There were development limitations was my point that I had said, because it didn't have access and it was only access via the back alley.
Yeah. Do you think that has an impact, though, on the parking potential for a property, not to have access off the street?
I don't think it has as much of an impact on parking potential. It may have an impact on parking potential with respect to if you're offering casual rates for parking, but the subject property is only offering monthly parking available. I think it has more of an impact, and where I see the impact is when you're looking at development potential and not having access via the street. For back alley access, I think people are willing to park wherever as long as they can get a good deal.
Okay, that is all the questions.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Whitbread?
No questions.
Mr. Terrian?
I think I know the answer, but when you read, for the record, on page 7, I think you mentioned the cap rate of 5%. When you made your presentation, did you mean 4.5?
I definitely meant 4.5. I have the applicant's information
I'm getting there.
No, I was
beside.
listening to what you said, and I believe you said 5%. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah,
But it's
and
4.5?
it is
That's
4.5.
all, thank you.
And my apologies, I write the applicant's information next to ours in my brief so I can see where our discrepancy is, and there's a big 5% written in blue, and I
Okay.
probably just read that
Just
because
for
I'm
the record,
45.
I just want to
Thank
make
you
sure.
for catching it, it is 4.5,
Thank you for clarifying.
not 5%.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Slaughter?
Thank you. Pretty simple, Madam Chair. This lot and its location, kind of further from the core on Kennedy, there's then Vaughan and then Memorial, of course. Small lot, 6,000 square feet. It does not have a curb cut off Kennedy. The actual revenue seems to indicate 173 per stall per month. Based on the comparisons that we see in that area, 190 Edmonton is a fairly good comparison. They're commanding slightly higher, but they have better access. So I think the actual revenue is pretty close to what we feel is market, which is about 175. But it's kind of a moot point because in the end, when we take our expense ratio, actually we're slightly less than the city in this case by $2,000, but fairly close. The main discrepancy, of course, again, is that as with all the properties on this docket, I don't see the potential for this site being developed in ways that would command a value of over $90 a foot. And I don't see any evidence to support 4.5% cap rate. So we use 5%, capitalizing our slightly lower income. It comes to a value of $544,000, which per foot, I think is supported by our evidence at $90.11 a square foot. And we ask the board to consider that revision.
Thank you. Ms. Wareham, any questions?
Just to be clear on the revision you just made, I feel like I sort of got lost in thinking about my questions. Did you revise the rate to 180, or are you still using 175? I'm confused.
Yeah, I had used 175.
Okay.
I'm looking at the actual attained. I'm taking into consideration what I think is a factor that may affect this parking lot. But in the end, we're very close. When I take my expense ratio, I'm maybe $2,000 less. So I was just saying that that's a minor difference. The key difference, of course, is the cap rate.
Okay, okay. So you've used 175 and your net operating income is 27,720 and the actual income is 29,401. You've used less based on your market approach.
Yeah, that's right. I use, the NOI, the revenue I think is very interesting. NOI can fluctuate depending on items like repair and maintenance, other things. So that's why we prefer to use an expense ratio.
Okay.
So we use a gross rent expense ratio.
Okay. Those are my questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Mr. Whitbread?
Nothing.
Mr. Terrian?
No, thank you.
And I have no questions. Okay, thank you. All right, and we will move on to 116 Edmonton Street.
Thank you. We're looking at file number 19-2846, roll number 12-093-590-100. This is 116 Edmonton Street. This is actually owned by the office building at 386 Broadway, and they also own another parking lot at 65 Kennedy that they operate all together for their tenants. I'm recommending to maintain the 2020 assessed value of $1,271,000. We have a land area of 13,299 square feet and 44 outdoor parking stalls. If you look at the aerial photo of the subject property on page 3, you'll see its location on the west side of Edmonton Street, just north of Broadway. You'll have to ignore the top photo. That is not the subject property's location. The bottom photos are the subject property's location. My apologies, I somehow put a different photo in. Page 4 is the subject property photos. On page 6, you'll see the land sales again. We've discussed this at length. The subject property is 13,299 square feet at $95.57 a square foot. On page 7, you'll see our income valuation summary. We have 44 stalls with an annual net rent of $57,182, a cap rate of 4.5% for a value of $1,271,000. Again, on the bottom of page 7 are all of our comparables. In very close proximity to the subject property, we actually have a few comparables on Edmonton. 91 Edmonton is south of Broadway, as well as 0 Edmonton is on Edmonton Street. On page 11 is the income and expense mailer that was submitted. On page 13, you'll see a picture that they also submit, which is very helpful, of where the stalls are and who parks there. That's my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Slaughter.
Thank you. Ms. Warren, you mentioned this is operated by the owner, so this isn't leased to Embark or anything like that. And again, there's a difference between managed by a parking company versus leased, right?
Yeah, there's a number of reasons. I'd like to say when a parking management company is involved, because they can lease it, they can manage it, there's a lot when there's one involved. There's no parking management company involved in this particular situation.
So you agree that the income is kind of what it is? I mean, they're disclosing everything.
They have disclosed their income, yes.
But you admit that it's significantly less in this case than what's being assessed?
I'm assuming yes, and similar to my presentation with respect to 209 Fort, the owner has a building that's probably their main focus and the asset that they care about, and however they deem they want to deal with the parking is their choices based on how it can benefit getting tenants into their office building.
That's all the questions, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Whitbread.
Nothing.
Mr. Terrian.
Good, thank you.
And I have no questions either.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And I guess I'll now close this hearing, thank you. Oh,
He gets presented.
What about
I got
so,
you. I got you.
You got me, thank you,
Don't
sorry.
worry, we would've-
I'm looking at it right-
on that.
Don't
sorry.
feel bad. I've had a few hearings lately where the chair has just passed over. I'm like, no, they get to say something.
I am so sorry, Mr. Slaughter.
No, that's fine.
Please proceed, that one was,
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I'm very embarrassed right now,
You're
I'm
very
sorry.
efficient.
We all have those days, don't worry.
I'm sorry.
So just a couple things to start off. At the beginning of the hearing, I mentioned that a number of the properties had been appealed further. There were some where, for whatever reason, didn't, but many of them were, and this is yet another one where it is pending at the Manitoba Municipal Board, actually from 14, 16, and 18.
Oh.
It's quite a contentious property. Page 1 is a photograph of the property. This, like the last one, is on what I consider more the periphery of the downtown, and it does not have curb cut access. It's accessed only by a rear alley. You can see that again on the photo on page 1 and page 2. It's an interesting lot. It's part of the economic unit of 386 Broadway, which is actually, it's not adjacent, it's across the street. But the owner purchased this with the 386 Broadway. It's our client Morgard. And this is definitely needed and used for the tenants of their property, 386 Broadway. They have an underground parking parkade, but it's not sufficient, so this is part of the asset, I guess. So there's 44 stalls here. And my apologies, there's errors that I'm seeing in my presentation too. I think this carried forward from the last one. It isn't leased to Embark. They operate it. It may be managed by a parking company, but it's not leased. The income that they disclose is what they attain for the property. Actually, if I could ask you to turn to page page 24. When we were doing the appeal of 386 Broadway, I needed to understand the whole picture. So, were the rents in that property, for example, being influenced by any of the parking rates? And so I asked what the actual parking rates were for the parkade and this lot. And you can see on page 24 of highlight, they gave me everything. And then I highlighted what are this property at 116 Edmonton. And then I went back to them and said, it appears to me that you're charging, maybe 120, but typically 160 a stall. And they said, yes, that's what we charge as market. So I think it's interesting. These are what people are actually charging, and we've discussed how there's lots of evidence out there, and we have to take things, which may not provide a clear picture, but I haven't seen any of these rents as part of the evidence until we bring it forward in appeal. We've had a few cases where the owners are actually charging an amount, and the argument could be made that, well, that's a business decision. But to me, no, that's market, because this is what the tenants are willing to pay. If they could charge more, they would charge more. They likely will have a detrimental effect on 386 Broadway. It's an interesting point that the municipal board considered in decision A11-018 pertaining to the Cambrian Credit Union building on Broadway. Basically, I'll just sum this up quickly. The city was suggesting that the parking lot there could have a better use than a parking lot, and a higher value should be applied. And let me read the quote on page 41 of my brief. It's page 10 of the board decision. Developing the parking lot would have repercussions on the owner. The board is persuaded that the highest and best use of the area in question is as a parking lot for the assessment year 2008 in this case. In those days, what was being argued is that the cap rate for the building should be applied to the parking lot that is serving it. I'll be frank, I've abandoned that position for the most part from what we used to argue as Altus. And I'm applying what I think is a market cap rate, 5%, not 4.5. But we are lower in this case on the income because it is what it is. And it makes sense when you look at where this property is located and the access to this property. So in summary then, if I may just quickly flip back to page 7, I can see that there are market rents in the area that may be closer to 180, 190. The actual are 160 at the property. I see no reason why I would not apply the actual. I've used 160, I applied the expense ratio, I capitalized it at 5%. So this is the one property in all of the ones today where we disagree with the city on the income as well. So on page, same evidence on the cap rate, page 13, I take our NOI, which is still, by the way, higher than the actual reported NOI. The owner's NOI is $36,451. We're using $46,464. And the reason is, again, we're looking at gross rents, and then we apply an expense ratio. Because as Mr. Therian pointed out at the beginning, you can have variances in the expenses year to year, and it kind of throws things off. So our NOI is higher, $46,464, capitalized at 5%, indicates a value of $929,000. And that's what we ask the board to consider as the revised value. That completes our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wareham, do you have a question?
Just a couple questions, thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Slaughter, in your presentation, you indicated that until properties come to appeal, you don't see these $160 rates, and that they're said that they're not market. And you had indicated that they are market because if they could charge more, they would. If you look at your presentation on page 7, where you do a market analysis of gross rates, if I look at your chart, and I've looked at it very, very quickly, there's only one rate on there that's $160, and there's only 2 that are $170, and the other ones are higher. So when you say 160 is market, based on the evidence of what you've looked at what's happening in the market, 160 is on the low end of that. Would you not agree?
Well, yeah, I think there's a reason though. When you look at the location and the site-specific characteristics of this parking lot, in my mind, that has an effect. And so, again, I think it comes back to, and I have this position often. I mean, I am of the opinion that unless I see something clear of why an actual rent is not market, my job is to determine market. But if actual appears to be market, then that's the answer. And so I do think that both of us should be looking at these kind of rents, in my opinion. They should be part of this whole analysis from both Altus and the city. I think they speak to the potential for this lot.
And when you speak about the location, and I understand the site-specific characteristics of the access via only the back lane, but location, the site-specific characteristics, but location, when you're looking at that, this property is on Edmonton, very close to Broadway. You have a number of comparables on your page 7 that are on Broadway that are 190, 200, 200. We have one at 320 Colony, that's $155. Would you not think that Edmonton and Broadway is a significantly superior location to Colony? And they're charging $160 at the Subject and $155 on Colony.
Yeah, I guess, Ms. Warren, I'll just sum it up by saying, yes, I'm looking at all factors. I think the site-specific factors are what are driving what's actually happening here. I come back to the position that if the owner could charge more, I believe they would. And I think if they did, they would have a detrimental effect on their tenancies at 386 Broadway. And I am very cautious about making those adjustments for that reason.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. Those are my
Thank you very
questions.
much. Mr. Woodbury?
Nothing.
Mr. Terrian?
No, I'm okay, thank you.
I have no questions.
Okay, thank you very much.
For real, going to close the hearing. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Sorry for it going a little bit longer.
No, we're good.